In this video, we're going to cover creating a planet with some Saturn-type rings around it. And we're going to start by creating a polygon primitive sphere. And I'm going to my channel box, and I'm going to make sure under inputs that the axes, subdivision, height, and width are set for 20. They usually are by default. I'm going to start by snapping this to the center of my viewport. Holding down X on the keyboard, and then return to my perspective view. And now I'm going to create the ring that will go around the planet. I'll return to the top view, holding down the space bar. I'll go to Create, Polygon Primitives, and I'm going to use a torus. The torus will give us a donut shape. I'll click and drag roughly in the center until I get a ring shape. And you'll notice that when you introduce this, it's a really bright green. And we need to get to the attributes, so I'll deselect, and now it goes into its object mode. And that means that we can go into the channel box on the right, and I'm going to start by adding more geometry so that this isn't so sharp around the edges, a little bit more refined. So the subdivision axes, I'll change that to 30. And you'll see it adds more geometry. Now we'll also be able to render with Maya and Arnold. If you hit 3 on the keyboard, that will be what shows through in our animation. So that's enough geometry. I'd like this to be flatter though. I'll hit R on the keyboard and I'll just flatten it out a bit. Now that I have the basic geometry, I'm going to add a texture node to it. Shift selecting both pieces of geometry. I'll right click and choose Assign New Material. And I'll use an Arnold AI Standard Surface. And I'll name it. And then I'm going to take the specular weight and make it 0. I'll go up to the color node, to the base, and I'll add the checkerboard. Hitting 6 on the keyboard to confirm that it is attached to both pieces of geometry. Now, there's a default UV map on a basic sphere which we can work with. I'm going to go to my UV editor, and I'm going to select the planet first. And I want to scale the UV map so that these are more square than these elongated rectangle shapes on the actual checker pattern. I'll right click and choose UV shell, and I'll click in the middle. Now what I find works better is to make it much larger so that the pattern is tighter on your geometry, and then I can go back into the UV editor and I can tweak it on its separate axes until I see kind of perfect squares there. Once I've got that, I need to scale it to fit inside the checker box though. So I'll click in the center and I'll drag it so that it reduces in scale, and I'll put it in the right hand corner for now, knowing that I need to map a texture on the ring itself and put it in the UV map as well. I'll return to my viewport and I'll go to my object mode. Selecting the ring shape, I'm going to use planar mapping, and I'll go to my attributes and I'll set it for Y, and I'll click on apply. And the first thing I would do now is go to the channel box, and I'll make the projection width and the projection height 30. This will reduce it in scale to get me started. Now I'm going to go back to my viewport. Returning to the object mode, I'll select both entities, and then in my UV editor, I'll right click and choose UV shell. I'll select the ring, and I'll move it to a spot where it's by itself on the UV map. And I'll scale it down a little bit to fit. If I turn off my checker pattern for the moment, you'll see we've got something like this. Now I'm going to generate the UV map. I'll right click and choose Object Mode, Shift select both pieces of geometry, and then I'll go to my UV editor, to Image, UV Snapshot, and I'll put it in my project folder. Now I'm going to continue editing the geometry and then animate it. You have to be careful that you do it in this order, because once we put keyframes and motion on our geometry, it is impossible to move and edit the UVs again. I'd like this to be a little bit more organic. So I'm going to use a tool we've used in previous projects. I'm going to use a soft select with the Move tool. I'll right-click, choose Vertex. Selecting a vertex, I'll hit B on the keyboard. Now in order to edit that, I'll double-click on the tool itself on the toolbar to adjust the amount of the soft select. Opening up the soft selection tab, I can go in and change the number to something else if I want. It's very subjective at this point, so I think what I'll probably do is just bump this up a bit. And then I'll go around and add a few more anomalies to my model. As I'm modeling, I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard so I can see how extreme maybe these bumps are. I'm going to add quite a few more of these, and then when I return, we'll continue with the animation process. I'm going to add some of these anomalies to the ring as well before I start the animation. Right-click, I'll choose Vertex, and I'll go in and select some random vertices here and begin to edit a bit. You'll see it kind of bends right through the whole thing. I'll continue around the entire ring. I may go into the editor and change the weight of the softness. And now I'll return to my object mode. I'm going to add one more effect to this using nonlinear bend so that the ring isn't so flat. Selecting the ring, I'll hold down the space bar. I'll go to Deform, and I'm going to go to Nonlinear, and I'm going to choose Bend. You'll see a green vertical line that's been attached to the ring. I know that in order for it to bend, it has to be parallel to the ring itself. I'll hit E on the keyboard, and I'll rotate it on its Z-axis so that it's flatter. Now I can also change it and be more precise if I chose inside the channel box. I'll put in 90 degrees. I'll hit 4 on the keyboard so I can see the green line as it goes through the geometry. Just like our lights, if I hit T on the keyboard, I can transform and sub-edit. 2 blue diamonds appear on either end, which allow us to extend the parameters of the bend, and the one in the center, when we pull down on it, will give us a bend contour. If I wanted to be just on one side of the ring, I could gather in one of the diamonds from one of the sides, and the closer I get to the center of the tool, you'll see the side on the right is flattening out. I've kind of got what I want. I'll hit 5 on the keyboard, select my geometry, and I'll delete by type history. Now it's a permanent feature.